Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I welcome all of you back to another Chris Chan reading from the Quickie. And we move on to, well, in lieu of like recent events, owing to Chris's release from jail, this should have some very interesting repercussions, or rather, some rather interesting like re entries, because this is about Chris and the concepts of remorse. Now, remorse, more than anything, is often attributed to feeling sorry and about what you've done, and something that you've got to sort of make amends for. It's something you've done that you probably know you shouldn't have done. So let's go straight to it, shall we? Please just forget about me in total. Please disband all online groups and individual hatreds against me. Please remove everything about me off the internet, your minds and your hearts. Chris, after making a public apology on Facebook, and he immediately suggests that because he knows fine well he's up shit creek with no paddle, he just wants to straight up say, you know what, that's it, I've completely had enough and I'm just going to leave, so I apologize. But so just forget about me. It is the right to erasure, as they call it. However, this is also one of my favorite things I've ever had to talk about when it comes to Chris, is Noel's unfortunate revelation recounting his last experience with Chris. He's malicious. He knows that doing these things are wrong, and he doesn't care, because if he gets away with it, that's all that matters. And that's absolutely true. Now recounting a revelation they had about Chris during their final interaction, it was that Noel said that Chris had not learned a single thing in 15 years. Despite all the help that he got, despite all the times he'd been trolled, Chris simply just rolled over and played dead. And basically, well, Chris is dead to Noel, as far as he's concerned, probably. Noel, by the way, is the administrator of the Kiwi Farms. In fact, the Kiwi Farms were sort of brought about because of Chris and, well, mostly through Noel's efforts. And I don't exactly know if he still runs Kiwi Farms or what he does like now, but we'll wait and see. Every so often, one of Chris's less flattering deeds catches up with him, and he is forced to apologize. These apologies, like most of the other times Chris tries to come off as emotional, often feel very forced and insincere, leading many trolls to wonder if Chris is even capable of feeling remorse. Well, in order to feel remorse, ladies and gentlemen, it has to come from a revelation of yourself. You have to be the one that has to understand and know that you've done something wrong, and therefore it is up to you to make amends for it. You can't be remorseful and you can't be sincere when you are sorry if you're just saying it so people will stop picking on you. You've got to actually understand what you've done wrong, and it could be that, well, whether or not Chris feels any guilt is sort of a thing that this may touch upon. So we'll keep going. It's not out of the question. A common trait of autism is a lack of cognitive empathy. Well, I'd say, well, yes, but again, I would basically what I just said, but I'm not entirely sure if this is, again, I've seen this quite a lot, but it's not really just confined to people who are autistic. It's more confined to people who genuinely think that they've done nothing wrong, and they think that because they are in the right, then that means it has to be, and he has got nothing to apologize for. Chris fundamentally believed, or thought he believed at one point, that what he was saying was acceptable and therefore it should be taken as gospel. And people did. And they hated him for it. And this was long before the trolling actually began. Meaning it's likely that Chris has a difficult time trying to understand what other people feel. Time and time again, he's shown himself unable to understand others' feelings of loss or sadness. He seems equally incapable of understanding how his actions could possibly hurt or anger others. Additionally, Chris is also shown to be incapable of sharing the emotional experiences of others, being affected by them, and being able to respond with an appropriate emotion due to his narcissism. This ultimately shows that Chris is incapable of understanding and feeling other people's emotional states. When he is expected to show remorse, it often seems as though he is just going through the motions, making the absolute minimum effort to get whoever he has upset to stop pestering him, so he can get back to his oblivious existence playing PlayStation 3. Oh, trust me, we'll cut to this first, so that this is Chris's idea of an apology. You can understand just exactly how well this starts when it has to begin with, well, an asterisk of, Chris breathing, and then he has to make it known that he's sighing. So, for those who know anything about Chris when it comes to him sighing, is that it's not really done because, he feels distressed, he feels inconvenienced, is the word. Yes, Raunar Natsunatsuk, I was naive, I was depressed for a long time, and I was prone to online deception. I was also still searching deep within myself to figure out myself. But I have found myself. I have matured mentally and emotionally. I was not a man. I have been a woman in soul, and now I am a woman, and I am still attracted to women. I am a lesbian, and I was a trans woman. I have become more self-confident, and I felt better to opening myself to more people. I've dispelled my phobias, and it has been good. I feared the trolls, and was unable to differ between the sincere fan and the insincere bully. Now, as long as I am still talked about, I see them all as similar, and I answer and respond at my own pace and time. My other life situations you do not fully understand. I am more required at home for my family. My heart is not an empty crevice, and I was misunderstood and mislabeled by a lot of bad people. I have shown and proved my kindness from the heart, and to you, Rednark. I owe a ton of apologies. There is good in those who are gay, because that is who those people and you are. I personally have never really had any reason to dislike men at all. But why did you say it then? We are all people, and we are all who we are. But the great hatred within you, Renark, had to be quelled to prevent an army of hatred to rise. Regardless, I am proud of you and myself, and everyone of you themselves, and love for everyone. Okay, so one or two comments are needed here. The first of all is that when you apologize to somebody, you don't call them out on things, and you don't you don't try and weasel your way out of it by saying, it wasn't entirely my fault, the things I did to you. It was also because of, blah, blah, blah. You don't do that. You just apologize for what you did was wrong, and you take it from there. And also, again, the whole notion of the fact that, well, Chris, again, this is also a pretty good illustration of the fact that Chris will, pull a face of some description and just keep it static, as though he's just required to do that and think that that's got to be the end of it. And by the way, as well, I personally have never really had any reason to dislike men at all. Okay, so if you really meant that, then why did you do it then? You know what, Chris? That's not a good excuse, and it shouldn't even belong in here. Then, of course, there is good in those who are gay. Well, again, if Chris was being completely honest, then you know what, he probably would have put down I personally never had any problem with gay people at all, and which would have raised more issues. But it's kind of interesting that he does it for men and doesn't do it for gay people. But the great hatred within you, Renark, how to be quelled to prevent an army of hatred to rise. So, literally, despite all this, Chris still decided to say that, you know what I did was bad, but it was with good intentions. But then he rambles on about, being a lesbian, and the fact that he's had to overcome his phobias, but he doesn't. Again, Chris doesn't seem to understand again things about there's no cohesion or there's no coherency in his apology. It's just you make it short and you address what you've done wrong, not what the other person's done wrong. That's not how that works. Concept of wrongdoing. Developing an understanding of right and wrong is an important part of a child's development. Very young children don't take into consideration what is ethically the right or wrong thing to do. They base their actions on whether they are punished or rewarded before they eventually internalize a consistent value system and learn to police their own behavior. Chris seems to be stuck in the former, childlike state. If something makes him feel bad, or if experience tells him he'll get in trouble for doing something, it must be wrong. If it makes him feel good, or looks like it could have potential rewards, it must be right. Other considerations, such as what his supposed faith prescribes, or how this will affect others, simply do not rank. And yeah, exactly. Once again, the notion that Chris never grew up is something that is repeated like time and time again. But also, it's the fact that, again, this makes it sound as though Chris wouldn't do the right or right thing if there was no reward whatsoever. Which, then again, because of what we know of like Chris's narcissism anyway, it's not entirely out of the question to suggest that, to be honest, maybe Chris would only ever bother to try and do anything if he was going to be rewarded for it. Not that it doesn't 100% make sense why, but more often than not, Chris will do bad things and think they are good, and he only does it because he thinks he's going to be rewarded out of it. Do you think if Chris... and again, it's... But then there are also like some really particular instances, like when Chris tries to like apologize to Doopy Doo-Over and apologizes to like Lady of the Cosmo, and how he still was completely incapable of understanding why people were angry, why they were angry at him for the way that he constantly talked about them, used pet names when they obviously said they were not interested in being called that. So, yeah, Chris may think that it's the right thing to do, but unfortunately it isn't, because again, if you call somebody something and they say they don't like it, then logically you should stop that immediately. It's not rocket science, but Chris seems to think that because he's right and he's not doing anything technically wrong, then therefore he must be right automatically. It's a very, very strange, but a very, very malicious sort of system for morality, if you ask me. An excellent example would be how Chris managed to destroy his relationship with Megan Schroeder. Chris was at war with Encyclopedia Dramatica, who were, among other things, calling him gay. In an attempt to disprove their allegations, Chris uploaded a certain image she came for quick.jpg to the website, apparently under the belief that the sort of information overload would get them to shut up. When the denizens of ED assured the image was of Crystal, Chris was quick to correct them. At no point did he either consider Megan's feelings or perhaps the embarrassment that she would have felt for being associated with this. When she called him out, Chris didn't realize he had done anything wrong and assumed she was only upset because she didn't watch enough porn. Bear in mind, Chris was 25 years old when he did this. And the fact that this is something that people would have, like, before they reached the age of 10, they would have probably have saw this and thought that's a terrible idea. I understand you may or may not have much exposure to sexual images, as I've had, so the idea of a hand job, which was the act drawn there as part of outercourse versus intercourse, was a surprise to you. I'm sorry. The only thing good Chris ever did here was say, I'm sorry. He literally didn't get the point of any of this. As such, Chris isn't really capable of remorse or a sincere apology. The natural precursor to an apology is the internal realization that one has done something wrong, a realization that Chris's childish, self-centered mindset will not allow him to reach. In his mind, he's done something wrong, only when the people around him react negatively. Furthermore, as a rule, he assumes that their reaction is just the result of some misunderstanding, reasoning that if he was just given the chance to explain what he was trying to accomplish, they would understand, and all would be forgiven. No far so good. Judging by his plea for a hobby store manager to forgive and forget, it's very likely that Chris still operates on kindergartner-level morale philosophy, in that he expects recipients of his apologies to immediately retract their disapproval and let him off the hook, which he might have experienced since it's a common scenario with small children and authority figures. Despite being a grown-up, 28 years old to be exact, not really realizing such a thing no longer applies to social situations after a certain point. Given his track record for selfishness, issues with growing up, and resistance to change, that would come as no surprise. And yes, for those who are at all curious about how this all played out, well, it only... Chris, again, because Chris did not get what he wanted when he tried to go back to the game place, and nearly resulting in the police being called by Snyder, Chris decided to respond by throwing a slur towards him and thinking that that was just okay to do. Because at that point, according to Chris, if he didn't get what he wanted immediately and if his apologies were not met, then that must meant that, you know what, what's the point in trying to do anything nice at that point? Despite Chris claiming he's a good person and not a monster. Moreover, Chris doesn't seem to understand that the purpose of an apology is essentially a promise not to repeat whichever negative behaviour led to recompensate in the first place. Instead, seemingly interpreting it as a magic phrase to clear his state, so he could continue his self-serving endeavours unimpeded. Motivation to apologise, which is just go to give him money, that'll be a good way to start. As explained above, Chris's logic when it comes to matters of right and wrong is almost wholly reactionary. His rationale for apologising follows the same pattern. He issues them only when made full aware that he won't get what he wants unless he at least tries to appear genuinely remorseful. Every apology Chris has ever made can be immediately connected to something Chris wants, and thinks he'll get it if he says the magic words, "I'm sorry." We almost never have to guess what that thing might be. He almost always mentions his desired goal in the same paragraph, sometimes even in the next sentence. I wish to apologise to Michael Snyder for that mistake I made over 9 months ago that got me kicked out of the game place. Good. I miss my Friday nights there. Okay. And also, y'all are the only place in town that has Eye of Judgment cards. Right, so, well, you may argue at that point it would be a good business decision if somebody was allowed back in, specifically if they were going to, buy stuff from their business, but I don't think at that point Snyder had any doubt in his mind that Chris would just continue as before. Also, the things Chris must have done obviously must have been so bad that there was no alternative. Also, Vivian, let's talk business. Now that I finally have peace of mind, I apologise for the past unformalities and emotional outbursts in past communications. Oh, past communications? You mean the one where Chris wrote to Vivian saying, "Have a goddamn heart attack right now the minute you read this message, you goddamn thieving whore." Yeah, that was what Chris put down, and he's just now coming off this as though literally nothing has happened. I have decided I will fully approve your continued audiobook videos and sales, but in return I ask for 25% of all the money changed to US currency you have and will have made all that you have put together and sold, as well as the 2 copies of each CD, DVD of the audiobooks, and 2 of each other additional merchandise aside from the audiobooks. I extend an olive branch of peace, and I await your well response. Have a good day, Vivian. Yeah, literally saying, you know what? Too long didn't read, I'm sorry, now give me the money. He doesn't really seem to understand, again, why he's apologising or what were the things that he said were wrong. And, it's just, again, Chris apologising for sending Vivian a death threat so that she'll pay him. And yeah, exactly. You could watch the beginning of Chris Chan Part 17 if you want to see that in full. Because Chris's apologies spring from this simplistic cause and effect mentality, things tend to get interesting when whoever he's issuing them to tells him that all is not well and that he is not forgiven. In one notable case, he admitted to ungentlemanly conduct regarding his feud with Asperchu. It was a fairly obvious attempt to get certain ads removed from the Wikipedia, but notably he announced his intention to kill off the character Simone LaRoche-Chew in accordance with her creator's wishes. He didn't act quickly enough, and Wikipedia was taken down with the web altogether. Although his anger was understandable, Chris revealed in the next video that he had never intended to kill Simone in the first place, and that the apology was not true and honest. We had all suspected as much, but it's nice to get a confirmation once in a while. After the Wikipedia returned, he did indeed kill Simona, but only under pressure and in the most contrived, dull, yet very lolsy way possible. In one apology that arguably highlights Chris's insincerity the most is in his in-comic apology to the Asperpedia 4, which takes place while they are being condemned to death. The cognitive dissonance this creates would be overwhelming to any sane person, but for some reason, Chris thought that this ludicrous non-apologetic apology was both okay and that the recipients would accept it as genuine. In that very same issue, in fact, Chris at one point sheds a tear after sealing up the populated 4centgarbage.com building and destroying it. You know, because faking remorse with crocodile tears totally justifies mass murder. Chris's insincerity can also be seen in Chris's misadventures with the wallflower. When the shit hit the fan and she cut off all ties with him, he made his usual pathetic display of sorrow, making it very clear in the process that he had only wanted her for sex. When his apology failed to work as planned, Chris became very angry and spiteful, and started demanding that she apologize for hurting his feelings. And again, I would say immediately Chris getting off the internet would have been the first big step in terms of, fixing all of this, but no, apparently it didn't occur to him, whatsoever, just to do the right thing. And again, this is only really because Chris only really just wanted to get into her pants. That's a universal aspect about Chris anyway, but what's kind of a little bit more shocking is the fact that you think Chris is really going to feel that bad afterwards. He doesn't, never mind feeling remorse, he doesn't feel anything anyway because he knows there are plenty of other fish in the sea, and this just so happens to be the one that got away, and there are plenty more in store. So what difference does it make if he makes one person feel miserable or bad, or that he has a track record of behavior that most people would absolutely just never communicate or have anything to do with again after all this? Another came from his apology note on his Facebook, discovered in October of 2012. In it, he seemingly came to the realization that he had massively messed up, that about as many laughs had been gotten from him as possible, and that he was sorry for it all happening. Surprisingly, it was a very well-written, unselfish apology that would seem somewhat convincing, right until he demanded that all instances of trolling and websites dedicated to him be stopped and then removed. And there was absolutely no mention made of him making any attempt to straighten up. All he wanted was all the bad stuff about him removed so he could feel better about himself. Had he not included that, people might have actually taken him seriously, but as usual, he had to fuck himself over. Whether you want to say Chris just forgot to put all this in, or whether or not it was all about what he wanted, and therefore, fuck it, who cares what anybody else is going to say to him, I'll leave up to your imagination. Common traits of a quick apology. Explanation. One recurring element in Chris's admissions of guilt is an explanation of why he did whatever he's apologizing for. The way these speeches are worded often indicates that Chris believes that if we just understood his intentions, we would all agree with him and that nobody would be offended. A famous example appears in Captain's Log Stardate April 28, 2009 video. Chris explains that yes, he videotaped himself performing a selection of disturbing sex acts, but it was all for his sweetheart Ivy, and this evidently renders his actions understandable and then acceptable. Supposedly, speaking to a young child who was deeply disturbed by his behavior, he tells her that his behavior was perfectly reasonable because he is both an adult and human. Okay, this combination of warped logic and an even more warped worldview was a crucial component of his breakthrough into mainstream infamy. Another example would be the time he used the worst terrorist attack in American history for an exceedingly bad joke. After learning that Casey came from a military family, Chris did what was expected of him, and he made a public apology video. However, he was more concerned with continuing to slander Clyde Cash and assuring he was a good American, although he didn't know the words to his own nation's national anthem. You can't make this shit up even if you tried. than with actually expressing remorse and making an attempt at recompensate. The joke was mainly directed to how weak Clyde Cash was. I had no idea or intention of offending anyone other than Clyde Cash on such a massive worldwide level. I suppose, like, for what they are worth, I'm going to actually pull up this apology, and just so you guys can see for yourselves, because this is like, oh, part 84's just went up. Oh god, is this? Please tell me that. Oh, okay, I'll keep myself focused. And it's amazing that actually, you know what, this is even on the channel that Chris made all that back again. So yeah, this is. I want to emphasize this again. Clyde Greg Cash Mays. This was the channel that actually Chris actually made when he was trying to slander Clyde Cash nearly 15 years ago. So that's like, the fact that this got preserved at all is like, it's fascinating. In fact, they're all here. So yeah, and as well, you can see right there. Look at the spaceship time. But what can you do anyway?
Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the recent video I uploaded.
Oh, sorry, I didn't have the sound on. Sorry, 1 second.
Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the recent video I uploaded, which obviously was a terrible joke. I had no intention of offending anybody on such a worldwide manner. I was meant only to offend Clyde and to note on how weak he was. I personally feel sad another day of 9/11. I cared about its effects just like the next person. Anybody. I'm seriously. I'm a good American. God bless America. God bless America, land of the free, and the home of the brave. Anyway, yeah. It was mainly intended for Clyde and to offend him, and I had no idea or intention of the worldwide massive offensive. So again, I am so sorry for making that Photoshop pic and making a terrible joke. I love America. I was born in America, and I'm proud to be an American. But anyway, instead of that, I have made up an alternate joke. Yeah. Okay. I will snuff out Clyde because he is so weak. I will snuff him out just like the candles on a birthday cake. I'll snuff him out like a birthday cake candle. My apologies there, I had that layer hidden for a bit. I mean, I had a layer about that and I made it hidden. But anyway, yeah, I will snuff them out like candles on a birthday cake. And again, I apologize for the bad joke. I've already deleted it, and I would appreciate forgiveness, just like the next person. And I promise it will not happen again. God bless America. Have a good, safe day.
So, among that, many other things are probably needed here. Mostly but due to the fact that, like, half the video, Chris was still trying to make it about slandering Clyde Cash. It wasn't really about trying to apologize for it. It didn't come across because I don't know if his tone was just the same or whether or not it was just Chris didn't. Again, the only reason, again, you have to understand is that the backlash that Chris actually received was astronomical, and unfortunately, quite a lot of people down here do express that, you know what, did all this, and then again, You forget. Well, this comment here might actually put it here. You forget that Chris signed the paperwork to authorize putting his dog down. He even drew a sonnetu on the paper. Chris thinks his actions have no consequences, and thus making fun of a tragedy in his eyes is hilarious and intimidating. And again, look at us. I'm more a patriotic American than you are, Chris, and I was born and raised in Australia. So there was like, again, geez, trying to read comments from YouTube videos literally nearly 15 years ago is like an experience that needs to be documented. And again, it will never end, and blah blah blah. Well, he did take down the video, but again, I'm pretty sure somebody else found it anyway, so yeah, just not much. Within the same video, he changed the Photoshop he'd done of the World Trade Center into birthday cake candles. That he saw no problem in presenting an image of the two buildings on fire, and repeatedly calling them weak when he asserted that he was a good American proves that he completely missed the point of what he was supposed to be apologizing for. He was far more concerned with sullying Clyde's name than with any blowback or offense his comments might have caused. And as we saw, if you want to actually see exactly how people took this, there's at least 250 comments on that particular video we've just done. So how badly you want to serve, if there's anything you want to say, and fine, well, Chris won't read, but you may as well just vent it. You know what to do. In at least one case, though, Chris came up with a fantastical reason related to his fictional universe for something he did wrong, as though it would be easily understood by anyone else as truth, specifically when Chris attempted reparations with Mary Lee Walsh. He explained that by slandering the real Mary Lee Walsh via comic villain counterparts, he allowed an evil witch to soil her reputation, and that by retconning the evil Mary as Sloweel, with her being betrayed getting arrested, he expected the good real Mary would accept his nonsensical so-called apology, and all would be well, not once admitting to violating campus regulations countless times, let alone personally attacking her when she tried to hash things out with him. That's the thing as well, is that when it comes to even Chris's portrayal of remorse in his comics, it's always that it's somebody else who has to apologize, and Chris can't exactly apologize because he always tries to retcon things in such a way that it makes it look as though Chris is completely blameless. Unfortunately, Chris is not Arthas, and this is not World of Warcraft. Arthas didn't actually do anything wrong anyway, but Chris is no Arthas. Rationalization. Chris is incredibly self-righteous. In his mind, he is the only decent man left in the world, and everybody else is a stupid evil jerk whose sole mission in life is to cockblock him because he is special. And furthermore, out of jealousy for his many successes in life, this mindset gives Chris all the justification he needs to mistrust others. Or mistreat others, I should say. Because as far as he's concerned, they're all the bad guys, standing in the way of his heroic quest. This everything I do is right mindset shows through when he is forced to talk about his prior transgressions. Chris might offer a half-assed apology simply to conform to the wishes of whoever he's talking to, but it will often be accompanied by a long explanation as to why he had to do it. I was wrong. I pretended to be him, yet he was the liar. I'm the real deal. So on that one part, I was wrong for the right reasons. This is Chris almost admitting for wrongdoing, and yes, exactly. He exhibited his self-righteous attitude many times in the Liquid Chris saga. Because he is the true and honest Christian, this gave him the right to attempt to steal Liquid's girlfriend by pretending to be him, and then gloat about it once he apparently achieved his aim. Once again, Chris saw no wrong in this, since Liquid wronged him by trolling him in the first place. Anything he did in response was entirely justified. Though, as it would later turn out, ego is not the only culprit behind Chris's rationalization deeds that he should be apologetic for. For a more recent example, Chris, in the throes of declining mental health, justified himself initiating his affair with Bob by arguing in statements he wrote following his arrest that he did it as a form of divine intervention to purify his elderly mother for other sins. Revenge then. To pour salt on an open gash. He eventually flat out denied that his soul bonding was ever sexual in nature, despite early admissions to sexual conduct with his mother existing. Womp freaking womp, Chris. Try and justify that. Once again, proving that Chris doesn't truly feel remorse for any wrongdoing he commits. Maturing. Surprisingly, the shortest thing we've covered so far. I have matured. Chris's catchphrase. Ever since the Doopy saga, Chris had the tendency to claim that he has not only learned his lesson, but that he also has matured more than anything. Chris uses as an excuse, this is something that Chris uses as an excuse to avoid any kind of responsibility or backlash from trolls, who understandably view him as childish for many of his interests and actions. If there was ever any point to maturity when it comes to Chris, it is that... Well, no, there isn't any, so let's move on. Retraction. Chris, believing that his actions are always right, nearly always have to be pressured into making any form of apology whatsoever. Most, if not all, of his apologetic messages are motivated by those people he physically desires, be they obvious troll or otherwise, or desires to appease, rather than the public outcry he causes, and certainly not by any true sense of guilt. His retraction of an apology is often redundant because nobody believed he was truly remorseful in the first place. And just as hollow as the apology itself, in that Chris is quite happy to lie to save face or to gain something he wants. For instance, Chris finally sincerely apologized to Alec and Mal for his actions towards them on the 2nd of March 2010. However, only a month later, on the 8th of April, he was talking to Jackie, and in an attempt to gain sympathy for her, claimed that Alec was trying to one-up him for months now. When trolls hacked his PlayStation Network accounts, Chris made a near-public apology, a blatant attempt to get his PSN account back. The apology was, of course, chock full of lies and insincerity. One of his favourite ways to smite his invisible internet enemies and real-life foes alike is to lay a Kamehameha upon them, thinking that he has powers akin to something more along the lines of Wicca, Voodoo, or Goku from Dragon Ball Z, than with the Christianity he supposedly practices. He only issued the Kamehameha retraction after his latest e-girlfriend told him he shouldn't have used the Kamehameha in the first place. Or even Chris's forgiveness blessings, which is about as fucking pathetic as it sounds. Considering that he quickly returned to his ways of cursing, threatening and insulting his enemies, the sentiment obviously doesn't stick. Nor do people think it sticks when Chris tries to apologize ever, but, consistency. Shifting the blame. When Chris isn't trying to justify the trouble he causes, he usually resorts to blaming other people. The most famous example is him blaming ED for the end of his friendship with Megan, even though it was because of a picture he himself thought up and then drew, and then uploaded to his article. Chris had it literally screamed at him in Mumble Free, but then, as now, he still doesn't know the true reason. The best anyone has ever been able to extract from Chris is that he came on too strong. While technically true, this is a vast understatement that fails to capture the massive amount of fault which lies with Chris. That is to say, all of it. The Wallflower. Chris went to great lengths to keep the knowledge of the Wallflower away from the slanderous trolls of the internet. Good start so far. However, he really wanted to credit her in one of his sycophantic Little Big levels. Chris asked the Wallflower if she thought it would be safe to credit the Wallflower by a ff.net pen name. Wallflower agreed, as she was unable to find any obvious trails leading from her ff.net account to her Facebook account. Unfortunately for both of them, trolls still managed to find a link between the two accounts within 24 hours of Chris dropping her pen name. After she was linked to the site and promptly horrified by how much of her personal information had been compromised, she politely requested that the article will be reworked with her privacy in mind, as much of the information in the original Wallflower article had very little to do with Chris. The request was deemed reasonable and the admins of the Quickie complied. Frightened and disgusted by what she had found, however, she broke off all contact with Chris. She also clarified to the Quickie admins that she had never dated, never had any kind of relationship beyond casual association, and before her introduction to the Quickie, she really didn't know much about him at all. Chris, however, not to be deterred, proclaimed many times that she had been on several dates and shared DNA, along with enjoying a kiss and massage. Since this would have been Chris's real first kiss, aside from the Chloe one, which was a lie, it was considered important by obsessive Quickie editors to see if he remembers it later. The Wallflower Wikipedia page article was written on the 19th of April. However, leaked emails from Jackie show that by the 10th of April, 9 days before making this highly suspicious claim, Chris had either momentarily forgotten that he had been kissed, something that would have been a monumental occasion in his life, lied on his Wikipedia after being kissed, or lied to Jackie about not being kissed, though that is also very unlikely. Either way, he still lied about the kiss, although it's possible. Well, again, lied about the kiss, but what about the thing where Chris said he had shared DNA? What does that mean? Although it's possible he's basing his story on a gross exaggeration of the truth, the two sharing a drink straw in the same is the current troll favorite for this. Would you guys? I wouldn't share a straw with somebody. I'm sorry, but no. From in the month following their breakup, Chris would go on to blame the Wallflower for having an internet presence at all. Yeah, exactly. You know what? It's all about what Chris wants. It's all about if it's somebody else's fault. The whole incident was Wallflower's fault for having a Facebook page for trolls to discover in the first place. Why Chris couldn't have just done the right thing and just told the Wallflower about who he really was, but that would mean that, you know, ignorance is bliss in the eyes of Chris. Chris repeatedly insisted that the Wallflower, who was the one who needed to apologize to him, as she had okayed the use of her screen name, despite the fact that putting her screen name in the level was his idea in the first place. More than a year after the debacle, Chris made it obvious that he believes that the person who should apologize to the Wallflower is Sir Tito rather than himself. Forgetting. Aside from directly shifting the blame by lying, Chris has been frequently known to forget important critical details of his life, typically memories that either make him look or feel bad. When Jackie was flirting with him by emails and found out that about the Quickie, she asked Chris about cheating on Ivy with Vanessa, the full details of which are documented right here. Chris, of course, claimed flat out that the whole thing was a troll deception and that Jackie shouldn't believe it. When Jackie informed Chris she had found a video of him admitting it and confessing, Chris claimed to forget this portion. What a surprise. On the 27th of October of 2008, Chris nervously announced that he had found his one true sweetheart, Chloe. Many things immediately leapt out of this as trolls because they accused him of lying, including his previous announcements on an IRC chat. Due to Chris's unreliable short-term memory and inaction on the part of the trolls, after the 27th of October video, Chloe was never mentioned again in a video by Chris. A little more than a year later, in Mailbag 13, rather than simply admit he was lying, Chris claimed, "I currently have no recollection of a Chloe," even though she was supposedly the woman he had his first real kiss with. In Mumble 6, the troll army called out Chris on his statements regarding transgendered women. Chris claims that he had forgot his previous statement again, which may or may not be completely honest in any event. Chris has discovered that, real or otherwise, a faulty memory is a socially acceptable way to dodge probing questions about one's past lives. And by the way, this is just the level of like his index of apologies, and as we will be discussing later on, it's strange the fact that all of them, there's almost problems with every single one of them, because Chris just doesn't freaking get it. Apologizing regarding she came for quick. Megan, I'm sorry for hurting you 15 times. I'll just go through these, and these are the big ones. When Megan called Chris out on his reprehensible actions regarding the porn he drew of her, he first copy-pasted "Megan, I'm sorry for hurting you" 15 times in an email to her, then went into detail about how a handjob works, fingering after that sexual frustration and ignorance were the root causes of anger. After Chris was banned from the gameplace, he tried several times to get unbanned. The first was a video where Chris apologizes just so he can buy more junk. The second was where he prepared a script, stashed a camera in his pocket, and then walked into the gameplace to confront Michael Snyder, claiming he had changed and apologized for his actions. After Michael flatly refused to listen and called the police, Chris berated him and hoped God would forgive him for being so heartless and cruel. Mike responded, "He probably will," and Chris stormed out, but not before calling him a Jew. After threatening Vivian's life when she had made better audiobooks than he ever could, Chris apologized to her, then made a demand for her to have a cut in the profits, the two sentences only separated by a single dot. Chris made an apology video after releasing a series of videos insulting various YouTubers. Aside from surrounding half-assed and insincere about it, Chris's motivation for doing so was clear. His PSN account was being held hostage by the last YouTuber he had insulted. In I Am Alive, Chris apologizes for his ungentlemanly conduct in regard to Asperchew. This was a transparent attempt to get the homo ads removed from the Wikipedia, and his behavior subsequent to this apology proved he meant nothing he said in the video. He made at least 3 videos during all this, and Chris had the exact same tone and attitude in all of them. In Solitude 10, Chris apologized to the Asperpedia 4 before simultaneously having them brutally executed, including have one of them being killed by a toddler. After filming himself performing sex acts for Ivy, Chris apologized for his actions, supposedly to a young girl who had found the footage and was scared by it. But he structured his apology to state that his behavior was, in fact, completely normal, and that she shouldn't feel bad for watching it. In Matthew 5:27, Quick Confessions, Chris apologized for cheating on Ivy. In 2009, Chris apologized to Mary Lee Walsh for slandering her via his fictitious villainous counterpart, using her name, not for his activity-defiant and vindictive behavior towards her, mind you. The contradictory nature of the retcon aside, Chris drew up a picture depicting this very act of remorse and even went to the trouble of delivering a hand-framed copy to her office, to which she responded with legal action. Chris took this as well as you'd expect. And so on, and so on, and so on. Though I suppose the only thing that I could think of adding to this is this one. On the 24th of September 2021, in a letter dated 5 days prior, Chris stated that he intended to enact repentance for his crime of stealing $750 from his aging mother's bank account, a crime he attempted to rationalize only moments before by citing his own poor finances and his fears arising from being made temporarily homeless, and for which he attempted to shift the blame again by claiming that Noah had personally betrayed his trust and failed his destined test by alerting others of his act of theft. Not a word was spared for certain other offences just as recent and even more damning. In conclusion, to Chris, remorse is nothing more than a formality that he must pantomime in order to get what he wants. Chris rarely, if at all, ever feels guilt for something he has said or done and expects either pity and sympathy or for those he hurt to forgive and forget. If you accept that he ever was or ever would be sincerely sorry for anything he ever does without an ulterior motive behind it, you are expecting way too much of him. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the end of Chris and his views of remorse. And again, you know what's like really, really sad about this? Is that it makes having to feel the idea of feeling bad for Chris even harder, because you know what? Why should you feel bad for somebody who doesn't who only feels bad only because it's something that's inconvenienced him? It's all about what Chris wants at the moment, and it wouldn't even. And again, it shows you probably it might not even be that, because if Chris really did want something, he probably put a lot more effort into apologizing. But a lot of this can come down to the fact that Chris isn't really sorry. He doesn't really understand at all about what he's done wrong. It's only if he can be seen to do something good, then therefore he will gain some kind of advantage out of it. But other times, I think it's just because Chris is just a bit of a prick anyway, and most pricks usually don't apologize for stuff like this. Yeah. I just don't understand. Again, this, it would be interesting to see if there was ever a scenario where Chris started interacting with me, and then he did something to me, and I had to ask him to apologize, and I wonder how he would do it. I don't know, and I'm not really going to find out either. So I hope all of you guys have enjoyed this video to Chris's views of Remorse, and I cannot wait to see all of you guys again in the next video. Take care, and bye-bye for now.